Day 3 starts off very early in the morning. We woke up at 5 a.m. for a 2.5-hour bus ride through the Vietnamese countryside. Why I didn't record any footage of that is beyond me. But eventually we arrived in Haiphong and stepped aboard the hydrofoil that would take us to Cat Ba Island. The hydrofoil made quick work of the trip, and once we arrived, we met up with our tour company, Cat Ba Ventures, and headed over to the port to meet our boat. Cat Ba is an island off the coast of Vietnam in the famous Ha Long Bay, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The bay is made up of 2,000 limestone islets and is home to dozens of endemic species of plants. Our vessel was the Lan Ha 26, a traditional Vietnamese junk piloted by two laid-back 20-somethings that most likely lived on the boat and captained by our tour guide Thang. Skipping the muster drill, we headed up to the lounge chairs on the top deck and started our cruise. In and around the island are floating fishing villages. About 1,600 people inhabit the area, and some of them never travel to land. These fish farms are a huge part of the economy, and as such, many are guarded by dogs. Most of them look a lot like Cooper. Our first stop was in the middle of the bay to go swimming. The water was a little warmer than us Californians are used to, but the best word to describe it was refreshing. But right about here, I'm making Ha Long Bay just a tiny bit warmer. Something I discovered while doing research for the video after we came home is that during the Vietnam War, many of the channels between the islands were heavily mined by the United States Navy, some of which still pose a threat to shipping or swimming today. This was the first dip for Quang's new swimsuit, which does a really good job of holding in water on the backside. The crew prepared a traditional Vietnamese spread for lunch, and after we ate beef, pork, fish, shrimp, fruit, vegetables, rice, and fries, we headed out to the biking part of our adventure. When we docked, we hopped on some bikes that can only be described as coming from the UCSB bike graveyard and pedaled along a path towards Viet Hai village. Along the way, we passed through rice fields and took the mostly downhill trek through the jungle on beach cruisers pretty quick. It's amazing how fast 8 kilometers goes when it's mostly downhill. The village itself was a cool sight. We came down a hill into a valley with the village spread out before us. After a very brief rest, we set off on a hike to the highest point on Cat Ba. While we were prepared for a hike, what we weren't prepared for was mountain climbing. This was the toughest hike I have ever done, and most of the way was straight up, climbing over rocks and boulders through the muddy jungle. Straining, we looked to Thang for encouragement. "We're about halfway," he said, not a single drop of sweat on his brow. After what seemed like an excruciating eternity, sunlight started to peek through the thick jungle canopy. Finally, after a great struggle, we had completed the 1.5-mile hike to the top. The view was incredible. We spent some time taking photos and catching our breath, and marveling at what we had accomplished. The climb down required both hands, but I was able to snap a photo to show how steep it really was, and to show how far up we had climbed. After an uphill ride back to the boat, we cruised over to Nam Cat Island for our night's stay at the Sandy Beach Resort. We stayed right on the beach in bungalows that looked like they were plucked right out of the movies. We met a friend, an island cat Sean named P52 Jr., and a foe, a Cat Ba Langer, who stole some of Bo's fruit. The langur is one of the most endangered primates in the world, and they only live on the islands here in the bay. After being driven to near extinction by poachers and sport hunters, the langurs are now little jerks who steal fruit and cell phones from tourists. The next day, it was back on the boat and off to another strenuous activity, kayaking. Our boat pulled up to a floating fishing village and we hopped off. At the end of the dock, there were a bunch of kayaks, along with a ton of European tourists. We paired up, except Bo, who didn't want to get wet, and we paddled away to explore the caves. Quang and I did okay navigating, only crashing into rocks and other kayakers a couple of times. As you could see, however, Quang didn't always help paddle. Being down at the waterline and seeing the scenery was something I'll never forget, although it took me about halfway through to realize my head-mounted GoPro was pointed straight up. We kayaked through natural caves that were carved out of the limestone rocks, dodging and collecting floating trash along the way. Towards the end, Quang and I were getting tired, so we attempted to attach our tie rope to Sean and Hannah's kayak for a tow back into port. After we finished, it was off to the middle of nowhere again to do more swimming and jumping off the top deck of the boat to distract us while the crew made lunch. After lunch, we started off heading somewhere we weren't expecting. Sean recently told the story at a bar, and I'll let him take it from here.
Okay, we're on Monkey Island. I climbed to the top of Monkey Island to search for a possible location of the monkey treasure hoard. As I climb down, I hear a scream in a familiar voice. It's Hannah, no doubt being attacked by monkeys. As I confront my own monkey opponent, as he lunged for my phone, I stuffed it back in my shorts pocket. When he heard Hannah scream, he ran toward the beach, and so did I. When I got there, the monkey had given up on Hannah and had attacked Blank's sister, where the two monkeys somehow piled onto her. One was flossing its teeth with her hair, and the other was sitting in her lap. And then this European tourist asked me to take pictures of her with the monkeys. She crawled up to the monkeys in the grossest fashion I've ever seen. And I'm like, please don't do that. And then the monkey pounces, and she gets up and she runs down the beach into the ocean as 3 monkeys pursue her. And I hear a voice that I've heard for a long time that I've recognized as wisdom and important advice to follow. Sean, keep shooting. It was Sharon. I turn the camera and I continue taking pictures. She has the best vacation photos.
After Monkey Island, we headed back to Cat Ba and said goodbye to Thang and his crew, whose names we never got. Not having enough time on a boat that day, we decided to visit a floating restaurant for dinner. Not knowing the boat travel to the restaurant was owned by a different floating restaurant, we didn't end up exactly where we wanted, but the food was good anyway. Skipping the nitrous oxide at the bar that night, we finally headed to bed, knowing we had a long travel day ahead of us.